Good morning. I'm Ellen Schwartzel, Ontario's Acting Environmental Commissioner. 2015 is shaping up to be a critical year for climate change policy. Last December, despite many people's expectations, the climate change discussions in Lima, Peru, produced some good results. Not so much at the level of international negotiations, but lower down at the subnational scale. Frustrated by the inertia at the highest levels of government, many regions, municipalities, and provinces realized that they themselves could make progress by working together. Some termed it a collaboration of the willing. Ontario is now playing an important role in this collaboration. Beginning this evening, it is hosting a Climate Summit of the Americas here in Toronto. More on that in a moment. This morning, my job as Acting Environmental Commissioner is to report to the Ontario Legislature on how our province is doing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to compare that progress with the reduction targets the province has set for itself. The report I am releasing today, called Feeling the Heat, underlines some messages that the Office of the Environmental Commissioner has been sending with increasing urgency for a few years now. By way of context, it's important to stress that Ontario has set itself responsible, ambitious targets for the reduction of greenhouse gases. They are in line with leading jurisdictions and correspond with what the scientific consensus tells us is absolutely required. And Ontario indeed met its first target for 2014, thanks to the closure of the coal-fired electricity plants. Ontario's 2020 target, however, presents a challenge. It is only 5 years away, and projections indicate the province has a sizable gap to fill. We have stressed the gap in our past reports. There are two reasons for putting the 2020 target in the spotlight today. First, near-term targets keep us focused on the task. Both in our private lives and in the business world, it's the near-term targets, be it tomorrow's math exam or the upcoming quarterly business results, that motivate us and compel us to keep our eyes on the prize. Second, Ontario's near-term greenhouse gas targets matter very much for the planet. In a world of rapidly melting Arctic sea ice, there is real urgency to reducing emissions now. Delay reduces the choices we can make to prevent worse climate consequences down the road. Delay will also force us to take more extreme and more costly measures in years to come and will add more uncertainty about the outcomes. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reminded decision makers of that urgency in its latest report. So it would be remiss for the Environmental Commissioner not to flag Ontario's 2020 target. You will ask, of course, what it will take to meet Ontario's 2020 target. A few words about that. Transportation emissions remain Ontario's biggest challenge. They have been growing both in relative and in absolute terms, and so far Ontario has not been able to bend that curve downwards. Buildings, that is, the heating and cooling of buildings, are another sizable and growing source of emissions. Refashioning Ontario's transportation and building systems for the low-carbon future will take time. Ontario has solutions in place, such as new transit infrastructure and new energy efficiency building standards, but new infrastructure does not get built overnight. Ontario's proposed cap-and-trade program, announced in April, was very welcome news because it will put a price on carbon. That rising price will, over time, drive down carbon emissions across many sectors. But again, the cap-and-trade program will take time to show effects, and time is what we don't have. We will need a whole suite of actions to address the province's 2020 target. There is not likely to be another standalone action comparable to the shutdown of the coal-fired power plants that allowed Ontario to meet its 2014 target. We will need to think creatively and collaboratively. And I say we advisedly because this is a challenge that the province faces collectively, not merely the staff at the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. I know that the Ontario government is keenly aware of these challenges and has promised to release a climate change strategy before the end of 2015. As I said, it is shaping up to be a critical year for the future of our planet. Over the next several days, the Ontario government has invited top climate thinkers and problem solvers from across the Americas to focus on the challenges we face collectively and to seize on collaborative ways forward. Ontarians wish them every success. And now I'd be happy to take your questions.
Is it realistic to imagine that, I think cap and trade is supposed to come in place in early 2017, that we'll be able to start seeing the effects of that by 2020? Or are you saying today that, cap and trade's nice, but that's long term and we need something, more immediate if we're going to hit the 2020 targets?
Well, I think by 2020 you're going to start to see some effects, but the gap is sizable, as we've said. And so we'll need other measures as well.
What should the other measures be?
Well, as we've pointed out, transportation and building, those sectors really need attention. And again, the transit infrastructure that they have in play and being built, that's another longer-term solution. So we're looking at shorter-term solutions. And, for example, we point in our report to the need to boost electric vehicles or to look more closely at the low-carbon fuel standard, which has been promised, those sorts of examples. Yeah.
Can you talk about getting rid of cars, period? I'm trying to get my head around this in a concrete fashion. You say the transportation sector, okay? Electric cars, people aren't seem to be buying them like maybe they should. What about the construction sector? What can be done literally to reduce it by 2020?
Well, I think on vehicles, on passenger vehicles, there is a lot that can be done. And one of the near-term solutions is definitely going to include finding lower hassle ways for people to commute. And the province will want to work with municipalities on that and with community groups. So there are all kinds of options, behavioral options that are out there. But again, as I mentioned, the electric vehicles are something that we look forward to seeing more of because our power supply, our electricity now is very low carbon. So it makes a lot of sense to use that to electrify transportation more and more.
Just to follow up on what that just said, how do you get people to actually buy these things and to get into them?
Part of it is awareness. Part of it is more public awareness for the incentives that are already there. Another thing that we've said in past years is that it's the nighttime charging for electric vehicles that is an issue. And time of use for electricity is something that we've talked about in the past. And if you provided super low electricity prices at night, the charging of those electric vehicles would be even more convenient. So, it's those kinds of solutions that need to be looked at. There's going to be a whole basket of things that the various ministries need to address.
Report that you said there's more and more high-rise buildings that are built in Ontario. How do you counter that the high-rise buildings that in Toronto would make more greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, there is a lot of new build happening in southern Ontario. You're quite right. And the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing has the Ontario Building Code, which sets energy efficiency standards. And so what they do is they ratchet up those standards over time. The challenge is that they do it right now on a 5-year cycle, and we've been saying that given the urgent need to get more energy efficiency into new builds, that 5-year review cycle needs to be faster.
So there's more and more high-rise that build in downtown Toronto that would contribute to more the greenhouse emissions to target. It's hard for them to target in 2020.
Right, yeah, I mean, those sorts of standards are not going to address the 2020 target, you're right. And one of the more short-term approaches would be to look at the huge existing housing stock. You know, most of our buildings are out there already, and retrofitting them, making them more energy efficient is another big angle that the province needs to look at. Look at providing incentives and you know, making it more popular.
As you can probably imagine, everyone and their mother seems to be lobbying the government for an exemption under the cap and trade program, or maybe not an exemption, but some sort of, you know, special consideration, or, you know, my industry is special, I deserve a lot of free credits, or
Right,
that sort of
right.
thing. Is there sort of a danger for the government in you know, bending to too many of these kind of industry demands and watering the system down, or do you feel like government has to kind of, you know, hold firm and really, you know, make cap and trade effective?
Well, if you're going to put the cap and trade program in place, accountability, transparency, those are going to be really key. Fairness, those three watchwords are going to be important. And the good thing is that we can learn from other jurisdictions like California, who have, you know, a program in place, and the Ontario's cap and trade program will be mirrored in some ways on California's.
Could you, I know the report sort of addresses it, but you say here that Ontario's climate has exhibited a marked increase in temperature that has outpaced the global average. Given that climate is tends to be you know, beyond our boundaries, why do you think Ontario is seeing that increase more than other jurisdictions?
Well, it would be probably the more northern regions of Ontario. And that's something that's been observed, is that the northern and Arctic regions experience a more rapid warming. Yeah.
You, I know, praise the government for its initiative, or so-called initiative, but do we need any more hot air, basically, is what I'm saying. Because it's just talk. We've seen the coal-fired plants. That, believe me, I covered it since when I was a young man, I think, when they first started it. And so now we've got other promises to do this and that. I mean, when is push going to come to shove on this?
Well, you know, to be fair, the public transit funding that they've committed to and that's underway so far is quite considerable. And there's other pre-measures that sort of set the stage for moving us to a low-carbon economy, and that would include, for example, the smart meters in homes. Now, you know, some people say it's a combination at the moment of smart meters and stupid prices, and that we need to fix that. And you know, we've spoken about that already. But those sorts of preconditions are there. The province is also working to put the climate change angle and the climate change perspective into its big planning documents. The Ontario Energy Board is making natural gas conservation more of an important feature. So there's lots of these sort of setting the table, if you will, activities that are ongoing.
We got to hope and hack to meet the 2020 target.
Do you know, I think that Ontario can meet it, and I think they do want to. It's a matter of really making sure that all the ministries involved roll up their sleeves and do it, and that the province reaches out to municipalities that are in many cases, you know, leaders on this, and you know, really listens for where the barriers are and breaks them down. So
a lot of conditions you just put in there.
yeah, but you know, it's worthwhile doing.
Well, I think everybody's arguing that.
Yeah.
Is it possible? That's what I want to know.
I think it's possible. You know, some people would argue that, you know, Ontario's target should be tougher. You know, there's other jurisdictions that have tougher targets. You know, near term, a lot of jurisdictions are really struggling with that 2020 target, you know, because it is in some ways a long ways away, 5 years, but in other ways, you know, it's a blink of an eye. But I think it can be. I think it can be achieved. We just really need to buckle down and do it. And, next year, when the Environmental Commissioner releases the next year's annual report, we look forward to seeing a whole basket of initiatives that have been released towards the end of this year that sort of itemize how they're going to get there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.